How you going, everybody? Welcome to the NFL Brekkie Show, Week 18. Season finale's come and gone. Script writers had some plot twists for us in the up until, the final quarter. Punt return TD, timely tush pushes, and, a pick by Taylor Rapp, and the Dolphins' stranglehold on the AFC East was a wrap. Bills overtaking the Dolphins in the final quarter of the regular season. And with that, Laurie Horesh, Super Wildcard Weekend is set. The playoff picture is set. 14 teams remain. A dozen will be in action this weekend. ESPN in Australia, at least Australia and New Zealand, has every game starting Sunday morning. Here in America, we only have the Monday Night Football finale. Bucks hosting the Eagles. I'll be there on the sidelines. But we had to do probably more workshopping than we've ever done to get this show together, just because there are storylines in every one of these games. I know, listen, it's NFL. You go to games preview, and someone's going to find a storyline. There are really tangible soap opera level angles in every one of these wildcard weekend games. So here we are. We barely have a chance to exhale after the regular season's concluded. A couple teams have gone by the wayside. They're done. Their season's over. And we immediately have to look ahead because we only have, 5 days between now and the postseason kicking off?
It's a week upcoming of competing narratives. It is, whose story is this to write? We were throwing around ideas, and look, peeling back the curtain here for a second, me and Phil's, not to do, in our pre-show meeting, but our usually dreary, tired, mildly exhausted call after the football ends on a Monday, and for Sunday for you, actually that's ticked over for Monday usually when we're having a chat.
It's technically Monday here, yeah.
We go down some weird parts. We're talking usually professional wrestling gets brought up, some sort of show from Nickelodeon in the 90s will probably get referenced. We go to some weird areas, but what you're staring at, and so much was talked about, I think, coming into this one, that the potential of a Lions rematch with Matthew Stafford and a Jared Goff rematch with the Rams, and that has come to play. But each of these matchups provides shared trade history, shared perhaps, playoff trauma and drama between franchises, jealousy, remorse, all sorts of different layers of emotional baggage that teams, franchise, and I can say, as a matter of fact, fan bases are going to take into this week. So we thought, look, history is written by the victors. That's what they say. So which victor is going to write history, and which victor is going to push some of these narratives, some of these storylines that we've followed for 2023 into 2024, push them to the side and say, you are but nothing but a footnote to our story, to our history that we're trying to make. And look, you go top to bottom here. And as always, this is the people's show. So we welcome your comments. We welcome how you're feeling, the storylines you're enjoying going into this week. Good morning. I know that's good morning, fellas, not goose morning, fellas, although I was called a goose several times by my 4-year-old this morning before leaving the house. Brad, always great to have you on board. So we welcome in all your questions, comments, takeaways from a week 18 that was turbulent, to say the least. So let's start with the top matchup here, right? And we're going to get it. Look, I know it is. There's going to be fallout from Black Monday. We're going to touch on some of that. We've got the Hot Take Hotline coming up, brought to you by Macca's, that we'll get into. But off the top, looking at the matchups as we start this thing for Super Wildcard Weekend. And the first matchup, Texans-Browns. Don't have to go too far back to look at the shared history between these two teams. When we consider, look, this is two sides of the Deshaun Watson trade. From the Texans side of things, you have a franchise that not so long ago, I think a lot of people, myself included, were giving Texans fans, say, hey, everything you've been through with this franchise, you have a free pass to go pick a new team. I'm not going to call you a bandwagon. I'm not going to say you're jumping ship. I'm not going to say you're a fair weather fan or anything like that. With what they put their fan base through and what that franchise dragged their name through, and how their name was dragged through by Deshaun Watson as well. I mean, it was absolutely worthwhile for fans to be looking elsewhere, and how swiftly those pages have been turned by D'Amico Ryans, CJ Stroud. Throw in, anytime you're going to drop, you're going to make a big move up to go get yourself another pass rush, and Anderson there screaming off the edge. A defense that, whilst it's not fully complete yet, certainly has the capacity to play above and beyond where we expected. And then offense, despite the losses, despite the injuries, Tank Dell missing time, and Nico Collins been in and out of the lineup. The connection that Nico Collins, CJ Stroud have, they have turned the page and become one of, I think you've got the absolute front runner for offensive rookie of the year. You've got a defensive.
You've got a front runner. I mean, some books here have just closed that. They're not giving you the freebie even at like $1 or $2. The 2%.
And I know you and me
you'll get a certificate of deposit at your local bank.
You and me are both interested in D'Amico Ryans as a coach of the year candidate. I know Kevin Stefanski. This is the coach of the year battle with Stefanski on the other side. And then flip it over. And we're talking about the youngest quarterback in the playoffs here with CJ Stroud. And flip it to the other side. The Browns, who were pariahs and deservedly so for the pursuit of Deshaun Watson. Some of the comments that came out from members within the team brass there and ownership. All the bad karma you could ask for in their pursuit, their signing of Deshaun Watson and the play that he's delivered since being on the field, prior to injury, was far from what they at least hoped for on the field with the incredible amount of guaranteed money they sunk into his contract, the draft picks that they gave up. And somehow they've gone from pariah to Cinderella with Joe Flacco there, with the defense is playing out of their insane level of defense and quality throughout that defensive roster. But the way that they take over games, the way they put points on the board, they've got, while we're on awards, you've got, I think, the favorite for Defensive Player of the Year in Myles Garrett, as well as an immense amount of contributors throughout that team. And you've got the oldest quarterback in the picture with Joe Flacco off the couch. The phrase that you're seeing thrown around is flack around and find out. And I had to be really careful there that I didn't butcher that one. But whose story is this going to be? Is this going to be the young, new AFC force that has put dark days of the franchise behind them? Is going to take stride upon stride and shake things up in the AFC side of the playoffs? Or is this one last hurrah for Joe Cool off the couch and perhaps into the history books?
And Laz, you can keep picking away at your angles. Joe Flacco is going to be making his first playoff start in 9 years and 3 days, whilst 3 days shy of his 39th birthday. It's the longest gap between playoff starts, second longest in NFL history, longest since Doug Flutie went from 1986 to 1998. But this is a guy who back then was famous for two things in the playoffs: winning wildcard games. He's 5-0 and spoiling the party on the road. He has 7 road wins in the playoffs. That's tied with Tom bleeping Brady for most in NFL history. Joe Flacco flacking around and finding out there are all these home teams. And now Houston comes in as a home underdog in this game, a team that is ahead of schedule. They're the third team ever with a top 2 pick rookie quarterback to even reach the playoffs. The 2 before him both lost, Andrew Luck and RG3, coincidentally in the same year. But this team had been the laughingstock of the division, let alone the conference and league, for 3 straight years. They won 4 or fewer games for 3 years leading up to a playoff spot. And the 2 before them, the third team to do that and get to the playoffs, the 2 before them, both 0-2 in the playoffs. So a lot of trends working against this Texans team, playing with house money at home. I mean, you can go, you mentioned that number 1 total defense, rookie QBs against number 1 total defense, 0-3 all time, including Joe Flacco back in 2008, his rookie season, lost to a Steelers team that ultimately went on to win the Super Bowl. Now it's Flacco in the AFC North. And a lot of as this has gone on, and I've been critical of it as well, I've been guilty of it as well, all the great numbers Flacco's putting up, it's like, man, he does turn the ball over a fair bit, multiple interceptions in a few of these games, probably should have had another couple picks against the Jets in his last start. He sat week 18. But the Browns all season have given the ball away. Their defense has made up for it. They have the most giveaways in the NFL. They're the 8th team since the merger, 1970, to have the most giveaways and make the playoffs. But those teams have done well, weirdly. Only one of those previous 7 lost in the wild card round. 2 of the previous 7 reached the Super Bowl. So there's like less concern in this, turnovers win games. Defense wins championships. And that for me is the question here. We can look at the shared QB history and you put it so perfectly about how Stroud and Anderson and D'Amico Ryans turned the tainted page that the franchise had written with the Deshaun Watson stuff. How does CJ Stroud perform? We know he's in the zone, as in he's a great quarterback against zone defense. How does he perform when Cleveland deploys man? Stroud's QBR, zone to man, drops 35.1 points. Drops. That is the biggest drop in the NFL, zone to man. And oh, by the way, Cleveland, best man defense in the NFL in terms of QBR allowed, in terms of completion percentage allowed, in terms of yards per attempt, all those stats. And they also defend the deep ball really well. And so much of what we praise CJ Stroud for, especially early on in the season, not throwing a pick for however many attempts, and his willingness to throw the deep ball. It's not like he's been dinking and dunking like, it was a Matt Canada-led offense. No, he's stretching the field, but Cleveland defends the deep ball well. Conversely, you have a Houston Texans team who is very vulnerable to those deep passes. We saw that on Christmas Eve locally for me, Christmas Day for you. Joe Flacco in Houston, sound familiar? Throw for a career high 234 yards on attempts of over 15-plus air yards, and he's led the NFL in completions and yards on such passes, 15-plus air yards since taking over. All of these stories it's strength versus strength, strength versus weakness here and there. Browns-Texans on paper shouldn't be this sexy, but it is.
Oh, it's so sexy. It's so sexy. And look, piggybacking off some of the numbers that you put out there, look, as phenomenal as CJ Stroud's season has been and how enjoyable the young quarterbacks, after you look at 5-year sample sizes for drafts and you wonder how come we're kind of in a bit of a lull with quarterback play? We feel like we haven't had a great replacement when we see the golden age that has aged out of league and, a couple members still in there hanging on to the end. But when you look at a 5-year sample size for quarterback draft classes, you look at the past 5 years, it has been underwhelming. There have been some dips, and it's why we do feel like there's a bit of gap there. And then when you look at like CJ Stroud and Jordan Love coming on and having the years that they're having and having performances, but as good as it's been, he's up against 5 pass rush win rate. Cleveland Browns ranked second in the league at over 54%, almost 55% on their pass rush win rate over the season. And against pressure, you are looking at a quarterback in CJ Stroud that drops down to the mid-20s in terms of EPA per drop back when pressured. So some of those matchups coming into play. But look, it's a very sexy matchup. And it's fascinating that the key part of this, 2 sides of this trade, 2 teams on the side of the Deshaun Watson trade, and he is not playing a part of this. He is not playing. He's not a factor in this, at least on the field. And quite frankly, look at the quarterbacks that we're talking about. If you were to throw Deshaun Watson out there on the field versus what we've seen from CJ Stroud and what we've seen from Joe Flacco over the last month and a half, Deshaun Watson, for me, is comfortably ranked 3 out of those 3 quarterbacks. Yeah. Let's move on to the next matchup.
$230 million guaranteed for that number 3 of 3 as well.
Okay, let's go to the Steelers at the Bills, shall we? This one is it's almost an alternate timeline one. Because when I feel like you're talking about 2 storied franchises here, classic uniforms, very well-known fan bases in the same conference over there in the AFC, and 2 very much pillar franchises, 2 franchises that you hear a lot of tropey stuff like, hey, when the Steelers are good, it's good for the NFL. When Bills Mafia is good, it's good for the NFL. Yeah. But really, when I look at this, what do we know about the Steelers? We know the championship rings. We know the 70 Steelers. We know Terry Bradshaw going 4-4 in the Super Bowl. We know a dynasty-style franchise. We know 3 head coaches. We know Mike Tomlin without a losing record in any season. And then when we think about the Bills, we think about the 4 falls of Buffalo. We think about crucial missed field goals. We think about Jim Kelly and the amazing offense and those teams that went back and back, 4 straight seasons to go to the Super Bowl. Look at what we came into this season, and one of the most popular picks was that the Chiefs and the Eagles were just going to meet back there with the quality of the teams that they were and how well they were coached and how well they were constructed as a roster. And we are not looking like it's a favorable ticket to hold if you made that wager going into week 1. It's so hard to get back, and that's what the Buffalo Bills did, and they went famously 0-4 there. And for me, this feels like there's an episode of Friends back in the day where Chandler and Monica are going on their honeymoon. And there is a couple in front of them also going on their honeymoon, fellow newlyweds. They're on the same flight. They're going to the same hotel. The couple in front of them gets the last first-class tickets, the free upgrade to the honeymoon suite at the hotel. And it feels like the Bills, you couldn't fault them for looking over at the Steelers and saying, hey, we're you, just a few minutes behind. We're you, just without the final polish in the postseason. We should be the ones. We're the Bills. We have Bills Mafia. We have Hall of Famers galore. We are storied and we are historic. But when we think of the Bills and we talk about Bills Mafia, there is a hint of poignancy there. There's a hint of a love for the tragic nature of their franchise in their success or lack thereof in the postseason. So for me, it's an alternate timeline. It's looking into an alternate mirror and wondering what could have been. And then for the Bills, even recently, when you think of, 12 seconds or less against the Chiefs, what has gone wrong? And in a matchup that they are now favored in, coming in hot, is this their chance in a new millennium with so much of that history in a previous one to start to correct it and make a run that people would start to write them off from midway through the season?
In Laws, it's a team that all season has been categorically better in Western New York. Mm-hmm. And now they're going to be in Western New York where the elements will be at play. It will be below 0 Celsius. And for the Bills, they won't have to go on the road until at least the AFC Championship game. And if the Ravens fall, whether it's to a Browns team or if the Texans, have that story written, the Browns have already won in Baltimore this season. Then the Bills don't have to leave Orchard Park to get to the Super Bowl. But something you and I were talking about, and I agree with everything you're saying, the Steelers winning 4 Super Bowls in 6 years, from Super Bowl 9 to Super Bowl 14. Terry Bradshaw 4-0 in Super Bowls. Jim Kelly 0-4. It's a mirror, except the reputation of those is completely different. Andre Reed versus Lynn Swann, Kelly versus Bradshaw, Franco Harris versus Thurman Thomas. A lot of these pieces are very similar. Cornelius Bennett to Jack Ham and Jack Lambert.
Look at him!
So
look at him go!
Every side of the ball, it's like it lines up perfectly. AFC,
look
the old
at this
AFL.
man go right now. Phil Murphy is in his bag right now. He is just reveling in history and stats and numbers and old names. I love it.
It's germane. It's pertinent context. But I mean, listen, you can point to the Bills not winning a Super Bowl in 4 consecutive tries as a disappointment. A lot of franchises would take 4 Super Bowl berths, full stop. And the Bills haven't been before or since. And if they fail to get there this year, they would tie an NFL record for regular season wins over 4 seasons to not reach a Super Bowl. So you want to talk 4 falls of Buffalo? Turn up the griddle from our friends at Macca's. I think it would be more disappointing to have this team win so many regular season games and not put together a 3-game win streak in January to get to a Super Bowl. I think that'd be more disappointing to me than it would be to get there 4 times and lose. If you really look at how difficult it is in the modern NFL to reach a Super Bowl, the fact that they did it 4 times is astounding. And I think, 30 years removed, we can sit back and say, like, dang, man, that was impressive. But now Josh Allen had moments of ineptitude in the first half, but when they really needed him, fourth quarter, 7 for 7 passing. And this is a guy who's the only player in NFL playoff history to average more than 250 pass yards and 50 rush yards per game. His combined pass and rush yards per game over his playoff career is the most ever, most of anybody. But this is a tough matchup. And I look at that number, and the Steelers are getting 10. I took the Steelers plus 10 at $1.87 for this exact reason. Since Matt Canada was fired in week 12, the Steelers, they had that first game where they kind of unleashed Kenny Pickett. But since Mason Rudolph took over, it's been game management. It's been Jaylen Warren. It's been Najee Harris. They have led the NFL in designed rush percentage, 49%. For Buffalo, they're 28th in yards per carry allowed, 27th in yards before contact per rush, and 26th in yards after contact per rush. So they give you big holes, they wear down, and their tackling hasn't been sound. And Miami in the first half through Devon Achane was able to get some of those productive runs on those that like, almost like split zone sweep around the outside. It's not how Pittsburgh runs the ball, but if Allen has the first half that he had against Miami, and this is a close game into the second half, Pittsburgh is very good at shortening the game. And we know Mike Tomlin, I joked about this. My man probably makes a mean chicken salad. I don't know if that's an idiom by you, turning chicken you-know-what into chicken salad. But how did this team get to 10 wins? The Steelers, I still don't understand how the Steelers won 10 games this year. And Bills Mafia, as confident as they are, it's the hope that kills you. And they're in a position now where now they're confident. Now they're the heaviest favorites of Wildcard Weekend. Pause. You got a team that can shorten a game. Total here's 35.5. If the Steelers can get ahead of steam and start leaning on them, there's an avenue for a stunning upset in Western New York.
It's going to be both the most common pick, I think, for a victory, the Bills over the Steelers. I think when people fill out their whether you're in a playoff sweep or you're filling out, you're making your picks for this first week, or you're doing your whole bracket for the NFL playoffs, but it's also going to be the one that's going to be talked about as the big bracket killer, the big bracket buster. A team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, even likely without TJ Watt, sounds like the best case scenario for him is 2 weeks away with a brace, with the knee injury he sustained. But you mentioned, that's not how you mentioned the rushing attack and how you can get after the Bills and what we saw from Achane. That's not what I imagine when I think of Najee Harris, but you can certainly see someone like Jaylen Warren being deployed out on those fringes and finding those alleys and creating that instant burst. All right, that one was definitely a wander down history lane or wander down memory lane as we really ran. And that's what is so good about the playoffs, and especially these playoffs. When we look at
It's
some
when
of these
history's
matchups.
made. Like these
It
are
is.
the games. We wouldn't talk about the Bills 13 seconds against Kansas City if that were in week 4, but we talk about it because it was in the divisional round. And that's what's so great about these games and why I'm a little envious. You guys get a 6-tuple header on ESPN over 3 days. Did I lose you, Laz? I can't hear you.
Apparently, my wander down nostalgia and history lane took me back to 1990s dial-up modem internet there for a minute there. So I just had to sort that one back out. All right, let's go. While we're on history, a little more recent history, let's go to two teams separated by a trade once more. Two teams in the AFC. Let's go to the Miami Dolphins paying a visit to those Kansas City Chiefs. So frustrating Kansas City Chiefs that haven't been at the level that we expect over the 2023 and now into the 2024 calendar year, but over the 2023 season. Frosty, frigid conditions expected. I believe we've got snowstorm heading towards Arrowhead this weekend. Yeah.
So wind chill minus 27 Celsius is the forecast. It's the forecast has it as the 5th coldest NFL game on record.
Which just sounds like so much fun. And I really do. You know, as much as Australia is known for having perhaps a climate, I know particularly in Sydney, we have a climate that feels like it is essentially, 20 to 27 degrees almost every single day, gets up into the 30s, maybe tickle the 40s in summer, but we're pretty blessed down here. It is fun and nice to see these different images of snow coursing down, even if I don't envy those sitting there with rather frozen rear ends in the stadium. All right, but let's get to this. This for me is a battle of, football philosophies. This is a trade that said when Tyreek Hill was sent from the Kansas City Chiefs to the Dolphins, we know about what we've seen this season from the Kansas City Chiefs, an improved defense, but that wide receiver position has been the talking point. The drops, the league-leading drops, the absence of explosive plays, an offense that had gone from the absolute envy of the league and one of the most historically potent offenses that we'd ever seen in the history of football, even adjusted for era. And we see it come crashing down into frustration, both from fans, from media members, analysts, and obviously from players and on the sideline, coaching staff. But we also saw an improved defense with the assets they gained from Tyreek Hill's trade. And perhaps in frosty, frigid, snowy conditions, it's an improved defense for Kansas City that they're going to hope is going to prove more valuable out of that two sides. And then on the other side, we're talking value, talking about Tyreek Hill for much of this season was thrown into the MVP consideration, who outside of a little injury, a little wear and tear on the body over the last couple of months, would have hit the 2,000-yard mark, we think. And he comes to town to remind them potentially what they're missing and what we could have been doing right now. And yes, you gained on defense, but look what you lost in offense. Which narrative is going to come out on top here, Phil? Is it the more balanced approach that the Kansas City Chiefs took, perhaps, responsible roster construction? How can we spread out these resources and allow us to build sustainably into the future, especially considering the skyrocketing prices for positions like wide receiver when you're already paying Patrick Mahomes good value, but a lot of money? Or is it the Miami Dolphins that ideally, whilst they didn't have any four of their speedster weapons on the field for the final play, that final interception from Tua against the Bills, is it their approach that no, speed is what matters. Speed will be the determining factor, speed and talent at those skill positions with Waddle, Hill to go with Mostert and Achane in the backfield there. Which competing narrative comes away from this one? Who gets bragging rights ultimately with Hill returning to Kansas City?
Laz, I'm not second guessing Mike McDaniel. I'm first guessing him because I said this when he came out and there were reports that openly, hey, it's week 18. We have Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert, who are questionable. The priority for us is next week and the week after. Those are bigger games for us. Going into Buffalo, knowing that if you lost that game, you drop from the division winner and the 2 seed to a wild card in a 6. And as it lays out, this team was always going to need to go through, in some order, Kansas City, Buffalo, and Baltimore to get to a Super Bowl. A franchise that has 0 playoff wins since 2000. Only the Lions have had to wait longer since a playoff win. So a franchise that's so starved for it, but has seemed to found the perfect cocktail and concoction of speed that is banged up defensively, that is going to struggle in defense travels, but your path of Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, essentially, I don't want to say conceding the division because that was a competitive game. The defense made some plays. Christian Watkins was unbelievable in that game. But the idea that next week is a bigger priority, therefore we're going to rest 2 of our 4 speedsters that you mentioned. Now they have that same route to go, but all 3 of those games will now be on the road. And I don't see an avenue where this team can win all 3 of those road games. I think they're going to struggle with this one, to your point. They're very banged up defensively. A Chiefs team that is, although they've changed how they've played. And it's funny, you mentioned it wasn't just Tyreek Hill that went from Kansas City to Miami. It was like an offensive ethos that went from Kansas City to Miami. Yeah. Patrick Mahomes, for 2 seasons, led the NFL by far. 41 touchdowns of 20-plus air yards in the 4 seasons he played with Tyreek Hill. In the 2 years he's left, that Hill's gone, Patrick Mahomes has 2 touchdowns of 20-plus air yards. 2 over 2 seasons. Mike White has 2. Drew Lock has. Jarrett Stidham has 2. You go to the 46 quarterbacks who have double-digit touchdowns since 2022. 46 dudes. There are 32 teams. A lot of guys, 46 of them have thrown at least 10 touchdowns. Mahomes' average air yards on touchdown passes, 4.3, by far the lowest. But the Chiefs are still winning divisions. They're in the playoffs now for 9th consecutive year. They're at home. I do worry how it would have been far easier to have this vertical speed, everything passing game in sunny South Beach, as opposed to now what it's going to be, minus 18 Celsius kickoff, minus 27 with the wind chill. And then if you can go into that environment and win as an underdog, you got to go to Buffalo. And then if you can do that, you're either having to go to Cleveland or Baltimore to get past it. Tua has 1 start. I said minus 18. Tua has 1 start below 0 Celsius. And it was a loss to Buffalo in week 15 of last year where he played well, but the team still lost. Patrick Mahomes, this is going to be his 15th such start. Much more comfort for KC at Arrowhead. I think they're going to get, whilst Miami is not regretting this Tyreek Hill trade at all, they picked the wrong time to make that tough decision of rest versus rust. And I think it's going to cost them because they're going to have to go on the road rather than, had they beaten Buffalo, it would have been a repeat of last week. Buffalo at home for the wild card round. I think they made the wrong calculation there, and it's going to cost them this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I just think stylistically, you mentioned the ethos leaving Kansas City and making its way to Miami. I think consider the conditions, consider home field advantage, and consider what Kansas City is trying to work through. A game that perhaps gets, and throwing in the snow is not as people you have. This is not from me. This is from NFL players, quarterbacks, former players, current players that play in these conditions. They said snow isn't as bad for offensive football as rain or wind, which is particularly nasty. And even the cold can be quite detrimental to certain parts of offensive football. And those nice frosty hands when the likes of Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes are firing an absolute laser at you. But in adverse, perhaps sloppy conditions in the snow, just reducing this game down, just shrinking the field a little more and leaning into perhaps defense and a ground attack. Both these teams are capable on the ground. Or perhaps Miami are more known for being capable on the ground. They've been explosive on the ground. You know, anytime you got someone averaging 7.8 yards a carry over the course of a season, Devon Achane, who's meeting marks that haven't been seen since like the 1930s. That's something. But whilst Kansas City has struggled to run the ball throughout this season, we've seen some lives and some revival from the likes of Isaiah Pacheco as he's come back in. Does that favor a Chiefs team that, yes, you mentioned the struggles they've had downfield, explosive plays, seemingly the lack of efficiency and effectiveness of someone like Travis Kelce, just bringing this game back down, almost reducing the potential for explosiveness. Does that suit a Chiefs team that will be playing at home, playing in front of a passionate fan base that has high expectations, but know that they can impact the game massively? All right, let's move on to our next one. Taking a look at the Super Wildcard Weekend. And now we go, when we talk about shared history and we talk about recent playoff history, about coaching history. The Green Bay Packers sitting in there as a 7 seed, making a trip to Jerry World in Dallas to visit their former head coach, Mike McCarthy, to visit a stadium that in a previous quarterback year under Aaron Rodgers, they repeatedly came in and ripped the hearts out of Cowboys fans. You think about down the sideline to Jared Cook on 3rd and 19 in 2016 to bring an end to Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott's phenomenal rookie campaign, where the Cowboys had home field. They were the top seed, and where they thought after Jeff Heath had sacked Aaron Rodgers the play before, the ball was surely going to spring free. They were going to jump on and secure an amazing, put them in position to secure an amazing comeback victory, having been down by thousands of points early in that contest. You think back to the Cowboys fans smiling with a bit over, I think it was 73 seconds they left on the clock when Dak Prescott went in to put the Cowboys in a go-ahead matchup following. And Packers fans notoriously taking photos of themselves smiling, saying 73 seconds, far too long to leave that man. Aaron Rodgers marches down the field and finds Devontae Adams, I believe, over a younger Jordan Lewis in the corner of the end zone, and then leaping outside of Jerry Weldon up there to Lambeau, the Des Corditt game, obviously. Some recent playoff heartache. The last great hurrah for the Romo-era Cowboys. And then Mike McCarthy, yes, against his former team, against a team where it got stale, it got old, and he moved on. But on the flip side of this, you've got Jordan Love playing phenomenal football, sitting at the top of all sorts of metrics like EPA per play, EPA per drop back, completion percentages, completion percentage over expectation of the last month. Football is played, honestly, MVP tier football over the month of December going into January. But as happy as Packers fans have been with Matt LaFleur and the new era, there's something that he hasn't delivered or didn't deliver with his couple of years there with Aaron Rodgers that Mike McCarthy did earlier in his time there, and that's a Super Bowl ring. They have not had the playoff success rollover. And which side of this comes out on top? Is this an exercising of demons for the Cowboys, not just against the Packers who have delivered them heartbreak, not just for Mike McCarthy against his former team, but also with the hoodoo of Jimmy Johnson, having recently been, for Cowboys fans, hopefully exercised as he's finally been put into the Ring of Honor. Talk about overdue honors there. Is this an exercising of demons for Dallas, or is this a new era of Packers, new head coach, new franchise quarterback, but coming in and delivering more of the same to a franchise that they have absolutely had the number on for the past 10, 15 years of hurt there in the postseason?
Laz, this to me as a neutral is the game I'm most excited to watch this weekend. When you think of NFC in particular playoff history, you look at the most frequent playoff pairings, and it's Niners-Cowboys, it's Packers-Cowboys, it's Packers-Niners, and the Rams and Cowboys are kind of snuck in there. But these are the NFC triumvirate over its history in the Super Bowl era is Niners, Packers, Cowboys. You get 2/3 of that here. You mentioned the recent history, the Rodgers drive, 35 seconds, but it was really an 18-second drive because that sack made it 2nd and 20, and they got into field goal range for Mason Crosby. That's caught a game. But you go back to the first 2 Super Bowls, won by Green Bay. They beat Dallas in the NFL championship game in both of those to get there. I mean, the Super Bowl era started with these teams in the penultimate game, the second of which famously the Ice Bowl in Green Bay. And now you get to the modern game. This is the first time ever that number 1 and 2 in total pass TDs, Dak Prescott 1, Jordan freaking Love 2 in the entire NFL have met in a playoff opener. And Love's doing it with the youngest, not just the youngest roster in the NFL, but the youngest to reach the postseason since the 1974 Bills. I mean, it's been 49 years since a roster this young has made it to this point. Playing without pressure, though Love has been excellent under pressure. Dak and Love are 1 and 2 in touchdown passes. They're also 1 and 2 in QBR versus pressure this season. That's been Dallas's calling card, is get the lead, pin the ears back, pressure the opposing quarterback, salt the game away. It's why they have such a substantial winning margin at home, because that formula has worked time and again. But a team in Dallas who has excelled in man coverage now faces a quarterback that against man, 23 touchdowns to 1 pick. Even without Christian Watson, that stat hasn't cooled off. So much here to like. And as much as people are going to harp on, Dallas hasn't been to the conference championship game since 1995, 12 appearances without. There's this like conflation of team struggles over 3 decades and quarterback struggles over the last half decade. It shouldn't be, because Dak's played well in a lot of these playoff games. And he's got 11 touchdowns, 4 rushing touchdowns in his 6 playoff games. It's a short list of dudes who are better than that. And against the Green Bay defense that was fine in Week 18 against the Bears, who've been a little up and down. I think this game projects as a make Laurie sweat, check your blood pressure, 38-27, Cowboys win. Thank goodness that's over. Whereas the other 31 fan base, or I guess other 30 fan bases, because the Packers won't enjoy that too much. But the other 30 fan bases are just going to be, oh my gosh, that's what NFL playoff football is all about in 2024. So rich in history, rich in present, a lot of storylines heading into the future. This game ticks all the boxes. And again, even with that, it could well be the highest scoring game of Wildcard Weekend.
You've got me going back 34-31, that 2016 divisional playoff. Dak Prescott against the Packers at home. Prescott went 24 of 38, 302 yards, 3 touchdowns, an interception, early struggles. Ezekiel Elliott, rookie Zeke going for 5.7 a carry, Philip.
Yeah. And
just if you want to feel nice and old, let's just have a look at the Cowboys receiving core. It'd be Dez Bryant leading the way. This might have been one of the last great Dez Bryant games in late in that 2016 season. 9 for 132 and 2 touchdowns. Terrence Williams, Jason Witten, Cole Beasley, Bryce Butler. So it's been a minute, and that's what you said. Like, people will say Cowboys haven't done this for so and so. They haven't done this for this long. They haven't done this for this long, and that's fine. Cowboys have also been a franchise that last check was top 6, top 8 in total wins since 2005, since the Romo era began. So they've been there, but they have not been able to succeed. And this one is going to massively define what's ahead for Mike McCarthy as well. Jerry Jones, offering his support, but Mike McCarthy was brought in to take the next step. And we're into 4 years of this, and they haven't been able to do that. 12 wins in 3 straight seasons is massive. It's a huge accomplishment, but it's not what he was brought in there to do. Playoff success was the determining factor. And especially against his former team, the Dallas Cowboys come up short again. And you mentioned the matchup there with how Jordan Love has thrived staying aggressive under pressure. And Stephon Gilmore sounds like he avoided a serious shoulder injury. He's back to put have a strap on that shoulder and have some support, a brace, if you will, and go out there and play. But the confidence that young Packers receiving core is playing with, those targets playing with, is going to stress this Cowboys team out. They've been a bit better against the run of late, but we also know the form that Aaron Jones has found himself in of late as well. Is going to pose a whole lot of recent memories flooding back in.
I have confidence in your Cowboys, but I took the Browns -2.5. I took the Steelers +10. I'm not touching this game line.
Nope.
Green Bay scares the hell out of me. How good they've played, how well they've played in December. So I as my friend and as somebody, I'll be in Vegas for the Super Bowl. I would love it if your Cowboys were there. I'm worried. It's not in. We thought the NFC after the 5 seed was going to be laughable, and then suddenly the Rams and Packers found some footing.
And we're going to get to the Rams in a second. I think a Rams team that the Cowboys handled earlier when they weren't as in form as they found themselves in now. Probably Cowboys would prefer to see them coming than the history that comes with the Packers. But the Rams, in fact, 6 seed, go and visit the Detroit Lions, the 3 seed. And we have the golden Matthew Stafford returning to the team that, in my opinion, failed him. When you look at his numbers and you look at the defense and the surrounding talent particularly the defense that they surrounded him with on the other side of the ball, the type of football they were forced to play so often. Stafford returns with a Super Bowl ring and a chance to end this Detroit revival that has got so many neutral fans on their side. Or, flip side, Jared Goff with a chance to prove to Sean McVay and the Rams that they gave up on him too soon. Hey, I was a number 1 overall pick as well.
Yeah.
It's not so much, I don't look at this as a revenge game because both have flourished since. It feels like, that scene in a romantic comedy where someone is built up in the head, maybe they were left at the altar or maybe they were dumped on Valentine's Day on a birthday. So harsh, something so, holding on to it and it's a grudge. And the course of the movie, this person shows growth and they find happiness. Maybe they find a new partner, whatever it is. And then they get the chance. at a meeting, maybe they meet outside of workplace, maybe they're at a wedding of a mutual friend, and they get to see this person that wronged them. And after all these years of narratives building and pent up resentment, they look them in the eyes, and a bit of peace comes over them, and they say, hey, look, I'm not going to sit here and say thank you, but it was the right decision. This wasn't meant to be our path together. We've gone on, we've moved on. We found new levels of success apart. So I think people throwing a revenge game around this, I think that misses the point. I think this is two franchises, two quarterbacks and two teams that have found better and found more sustainable success. And certainly for Stafford, we've seen the getting to the glittering heights that he did with a Super Bowl championship, a Lombardi, and a Super Bowl ring. And Detroit actually having what appears to be a bona fide, real, concrete, tangible revival, return of strong playoff football for the Detroit Lions. But in saying that, Matthew Stafford seems like just the right guy to come in there and light up a stadium that he had made his own for so many years.
Laz, he loves that venue. You mentioned how you feel like the franchise failed him. Here's a number: 277.7 pass yards per game at Ford Field. 277.7. That is the fourth most for any quarterback at any single venue in NFL history. Number 4. And he didn't get a playoff home game. He was prolific as it could be. And he had to go on the road 3 times in the playoffs. He lost all 3 games. This poor Lions franchise, they've been to the postseason a fair bit since their last playoff win, 1991. Longest playoff losing streak in NFL history. They're 0-9. And you go back 31 years and 9 days since they last won a playoff game. That's tied to the day for the third longest drought in NFL history, should it end, with the Bengals team from a couple years ago. But the Lions also have the second longest drought of playoff wins. Prior to 1991, you got to go back to 1957 NFL championship game. So since 1957, this team has 1 playoff win. I mean, it's futility, irrespective of code, irrespective of country, that few franchises that are not defunct can match. And like you said, now it's not a revenge game. In fact, Jared Goff, even for his part, if anything, it would be a revenge game for him, because he was on a Rams team. He was the quarterback in the Super Bowl. He didn't stink. He had a really rough start. We were wondering, he was, QB3 in year 1 for a spell, but he led the Rams to a Super Bowl, one of the more forgettable Super Bowls we've had, Super Bowl 53 against the Patriots. Yeah, well, the game the year before was an all-time great Super Bowl, the Eagles beating the Patriots in Minneapolis, Super Bowl 52. And then we had, as neutrals, we had our pound of flesh that we had to pay, which was Super Bowl 53. But he's just the 4th quarterback ever to face in the playoffs a team that he previously led to a Super Bowl. So if there's any revenge game thing, I would say it's Goff to the Rams. But in those 4 QBs who have faced the team in the playoffs, they led to the Super Bowl. The team, in this case, the Rams, all-time 3-0, including my beloved Broncos and Peyton Manning against the Colts in 2014. You also got Ken Stabler, 1980, Oilers against the Raiders, and 1957, Jack Kemp against the Chargers for the Bills. But this is the first time ever we've had this on both sides. First time ever we've had in the playoffs, head-to-head with both QBs facing their former teams and all the expansion and free agency. This is the first time it's happened. And you look at the numbers since the trade, they've won the exact same amount of games, 24 apiece. You look at the touchdown passes, Goff has 3 more, 78-75. And the per attempt stats, it's a little favor to Stafford, a little bit more yards per attempt, and completion percentage is 68 and 67. So these guys, like you said, they both just leveled up, and now they meet in the postseason with the weight of a city on Detroit's side. This game is going to come down to 2 things: the actual 60 minutes of football itself, all the history behind us. When we tune into this game, it's going to come down to 2 things. How well does Detroit handle the Rams pre-snap motion? Only Miami and San Francisco have that motion at the snap rate higher than the Rams. And since Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, Matt Stafford, Cooper Kupp, the 4 of them have been on the field, they've deployed it more, and they've been an exceptional offense when they deploy it. Stafford has the 4th best yards per attempt with that at the snap motion. Detroit's 2nd worst in terms of yards per attempt allowed. In fact, only Washington and the Chargers have allowed more touchdowns through the air on motion at the snap. That is bad defensive company. So Detroit's got to figure that out. But these playoff games are typically close, and as equal as these quarterbacks have been, it wouldn't surprise me if this came down to a late field goal attempt, which if it's off the boot of maybe Brett Maher, who was the Rams kicker in San Francisco last week, I would sweat if I were a Rams supporter, because there's 16 missed field goals and extra points this season. That's the most of any playoff team since Pittsburgh in 2001. So when margins are small, stakes are high, the Rams all season have missed kicks of consequence. In Detroit, raucous environment, it would be a poetic, heart skipping a beat for Dan Campbell and the gang before they can get a long overdue win. This is a fun game, but it's not like you said, it's not this bitter revenge thing. It's just, you're going to feel really good for one of these quarterbacks after 60 minutes.
I think there's a chance for some real catharsis here from this matchup. But I certainly, as I look at this matchup, we're going to spend so much time talking about the quarterbacks and the offensive power and weaponry that's out there. Although Sam Laporta says there's a chance he could play, avoiding a serious knee injury. We'll see about that. But I look towards the Rams defense as being more capable of causing some issues for the opposing offense. I still have that pass defense. The pass rush, I don't think, is consistently there to threaten Matthew Stafford, and Matthew Stafford in very comfortable surroundings with those names that you mentioned there, with Puka Nacua, with Cooper Kupp, with Kyron Williams, with an offensive line that's giving him time. I just really, looking at that matchup,
Kobe Turner was a draft home run for the Rams in the third round, the kid from Wake Forest.
I just struggle to see, when you look at all sides of the ball, I just think there is still such an issue there with that Detroit Lions defense up against someone like Stafford, but a unique motivation, unique energy surrounding that one. Okay, one more to go here. Somehow we're still on this, and we've got a little bit more to go this show, but our last one here, the Eagles and Bucks. This one's quick. The Eagles and Bucks played each other. The Bucks hosting this one played each other in week 3. And when I was looking at this just looked back. For me, this is a throwback to a simpler time for Eagles fans. And we'll get to some Eagles fans in a bit who contributed to Hot Take Hotline. But this was a simple time. Jalen Hurts didn't have the cleanest game of his career. He threw a couple interceptions, but, he did have over 270 yards passing this one. But you look, it was the dual 130s. It was committing to a running game. It was DeAndre Swift running wild for 130 yards. It was AJ Brown back in his 125-yard streak, having 130 plus in this contest. It was back to when the Eagles, whilst it wasn't dominant. It was a 25-11 victory. It wasn't like, oh my God, look, they blew the doors off the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It was the type of victory that did have us feeling like, okay, here's an Eagles team that knows how to win. They're in the elite class of the NFC. So far has fallen off since then. 5 of their last 6 games have been defeats. The one win was a 1-score hold-on victory against the New York Giants, same New York Giants that came back 2 weeks later and toppled them in week 18, thrashed them. They had them down. I know the Eagles pulled their starters just before going into halftime, but they had them down 24-0. 24 to Bubkus, 24 to Donut, 24 to Bagel, however you put it, whatever food, brekkie item you want to use there. Yeah. The Giants had absolutely taken that game and ended it before the starters could even leave the field for the Eagles. Where the questions are coming from, where the questions are coming from for everywhere, where the answers are going to come from is a mystery at this point for a pass defense that not only is it's not improving, they're losing players, they're suffering injuries. This is, a pass rush, big name defensive tackles that have not delivered on a consistent down in, down out projection from week to week to week as the season's gone on. Feels like there's a rookie wall for certain players. And then offensively, like we've said all season, this passing game has failed to find rhythm. It's failed to find deep completions and explosive plays. We saw interceptions on those types of efforts against the Giants. This is a Giants team that has already had their defensive coordinator resign and leave the franchise within 24 hours of this victory. So it's not exactly a powerhouse they were coming up against. So, look, this was a throwback to a simpler time for the Eagles, and one that I think their fans will be desperate that they can tap back into again. But the hopes and the belief has to be pretty shaky at this point.
Yeah, Laz, that Monday night game in week 3 in which Philly went to Tampa, won 25-11, kind of an ugly win. And at that point, the Eagles had that, win against the Patriots in week 1 where they had a couple early defensive touchdowns and just kind of got it over the line. All right, well, that was
Mac Jones moved the ball against that secondary.
Yeah, but like that's exactly the thing. It was the Eagles weirdly went through that tough stretch of schedule where they just kept finding results. But the Super Bowl hangover is a real thing, and it starts with presumption. And as much as these 53 guys in the locker room say it's not hey, we're not gonna assume we're gonna get back, we're gonna work even harder. History suggests that in the deepest parts of their subconsciouses, these players say, dang, man, we should have won that game, Super Bowl 57. If we do the exact same thing, we're getting back. And that measure of presumption that starts in the front office, and then, all right, things aren't working defensively, we're going to switch defensive play callers, and it gets worse. I mean, their defense in the last, 4 or 5 games that Matt Patricia's been in charge, they're bottom 3 in the NFL in points per game allowed, yards per game allowed, third down percentage allowed, and red zone percentage. And that's not the biggest problem for me. The biggest problem for me is how Jalen Hurts has regressed against the blitz. Mina Kimes on a program that she and I worked together a few weeks ago put it beautifully. She said Jalen Hurts' calling card in college and the early days of his pros is that every year he got better. This year, against the blitz, against added pressure, is the first time he's regressed anywhere. And you look at Hurts' raw numbers against the blitz: 5 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. That was really pronounced in the last 3 weeks when he faced the Giants and the Giants in 2 of those games. Wink Martindale and that crew, now former Giants DC, blitz at the second highest rate in the NFL. Tampa's third highest blitz rate per down. Minnesota's first. But Hurts is going to really feel the pressure here. Philly enters the playoffs with losses in 5 of their last 6. Only 6 teams in the Super Bowl era. They're the 6th team, rather, in the Super Bowl era to enter 1-5 or worse, to enter the playoffs at that rate. None of the previous 5 passed the divisional round. Now, they went 3-2 in the wild card, but 0-3 thereafter. So even if Philly cobbles together a win here, history says they're not getting past Dallas or San Francisco, depending on how things go with that, whatever the pairing is for that second game. And that a lot of that goes back to the Super Bowl hangover. Last 27 years, only 3 of the 27 Super Bowl losers made it back to a conference championship game. So for the Eagles, I expect their season to end here in Tampa or the next week at opponent TBD. To me, it doesn't matter. They are the 4th or 5th best team in the NFC, and that will be revealed at some point in the next fortnight.
I think that blueprint is sitting there. We don't need to. I've said my piece on this matchup, but you brought up against the blitz and against pressure and how he fares, but against the blitz, he's currently ranked. You mentioned the raw numbers. If you dive in a little more to EPA per drop back against 5 or more rushes, keep scrolling, because you find Jalen Hurts down at 28th in the league.
Page 2 of the Google search. That's not good.
Yeah.
Not where you want to
be. He's 28th in the league, and ahead of him are names like Mac Jones, Gardner Minshew, no offense to Gardner Minshew, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So that productivity we know, and that was part of going into the matchup in the Super Bowl last year. We saw, and Hurts had a phenomenal game, perhaps his greatest game as a professional NFL quarterback against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, but we knew that the studies and the numbers and the tape showed that against pressure, against blitzes, particularly when teams were smart enough to hem in some of those escape routes as well as they blitz, his numbers fell off incredibly. And we were looking at that because of a matchup against Spagnuolo and the Chiefs defense. This time we're talking about Tampa Bay. All right, that is a very rich tapestry, a history-laden, drama-filled, and shared bond or shared trauma setup that we have for Wildcard Weekend. And while we're on some shared thoughts, and I will just bring this one up here, Benny G, for a long season, you two are looking outstanding today. Let's go Steelers. Benny, thank you very much.
It's our color scheme laws, yellow and black, or black and yellow, whatever.
There you go. Let's move along from a very, very fun dive into wildcard narratives over to
your microphone laws. Your microphone is out.
Kicking this thing right off. The Hot Take Hotline, brought to you by Macca's. This microphone is having an absolute day today. But kicking it over, let's have a look here. We've got Perry. And his hot take was pretty simple. Mm-hmm. When he looked at his team, the team that he goes for, he had a simple solution, and that is for the Philadelphia Eagles that we just got done talking about. If their season particularly finishes in the next 7 or 14 days, Simple. New coaching staff for the Eagles. I followed up with Perry about, is everyone on this list? He said, coordinators, absolutely. And if the coordinators were Sirianni's choice, he goes as well. Not an uncommon take coming out of Philadelphia fans, media, radio, if you've caught some of the snippets of late. Do you think, let's start with this, do you think it's realistic that with a loss this week, if they do lose to Tampa Bay on the road as a 5 seed, having been on the first team in the NFL to start 10-1 and fail to reach 12 wins despite having 17 games to get to, do you think Sirianni could actually lose his spot there as head coach? Could the Sirianni era already be over in 7 days' time with a defeat in Philadelphia?
I mean, the NFL moves quickly. To me, it doesn't move that quickly, but something we talked about in the preseason, something that made me be on Eagles under 12.5 wins, cash, was the brain drain. The Shane Steichen, Jonathan Gannon, last year's offensive defensive coordinator, going in, other teams say, hey, we're keen to give you a shot at head coach. How great has Shane Steichen done with gum and toothpicks and coconuts making a transistor radio? Like, I mean, it was just a MacGyver reference. To get that team to the cusp of a playoff berth and didn't miss it by all that much. And then Jonathan Gannon with QB2, QB3 for much of it, finally some positive momentum, so much so you wonder, all right, can this team with Kyler Murray and health around it and a little bit more offensive help in the top end of the draft get something done? Those are the coordinators that left.
Yeah.
The coordinators that came in at 10-1 start have been exposed over the latter half of the season. I know it's getting a little off topic, but it's something I would worry about a lot in Detroit because their OC and DC are already on Washington's interview list, and they're going to be on others. And I'd be stunned if they keep both of them. I'd be stunned if they keep either. So Detroit, they're going to have the brain drain, as we call it, next year. And that's the thing. A lot of these teams, when they have these coordinators, we've seen it with Kansas City. Eric Bieniemy finally goes to DC. He might, didn't quite translate, although their problems were more defensive anyway. But how Kansas City's regressed now with the new offensive coordinator. It's tough to get traction there with new first-year coordinators. But those guys weren't at the helm of the team that went to the Super Bowl. Nick Sirianni was. So I would say more likely than not, we see a change, certainly at defensive coordinator. It's not like Matt Patricia's some young and upcoming guy. We already saw them make the change from Desai to Patricia. I think it's a foregone conclusion they get a new. I think it's a foregone conclusion they get a new DC. On the offensive side, I'd say 50-50, but there will be a change somewhere in that coaching staff. Griddle's a little too hot for me if we're saying all three.
The one thing I'll say is, one, this is Philadelphia, and they like it hot in Philadelphia. We've seen articles and exposés before about just in terms of the institution, the organization that Philadelphia Eagles are. Jeffrey Lurie likes that kind of level of competitive, at times combative friction to create chemistry, to create ideas, to create competitive drive. He does like that. And look, they have had changes there. They have had moves. They've moved on from a Super Bowl winning head coach in Doug Peterson now. With Sirianni, because he's such a lightning rod as well, because of the clip that now goes viral after each one of these Eagles losses, his response after they beat Kansas City and him looking up at the tunnel and shouting at Kansas City Chiefs fans, you're making noise now. Not quote for quote there, but I'll keep it PG. But for me, it's on the table. For me, it is a possibility. If this goes all pear-shaped, and the Eagles, having won there already this season in Tampa Bay, could very well right the ship here and create themselves a little bit of nobody believes in us, which is apt right now. But if they go and get beaten by multiple scores, this type of franchise, this type of, like I said, the combative chemistry that they often have in that building, it wouldn't stun. But yeah, I definitely think the changes are coming. Sean Desai was a heralded name coming over. It was a hire that was absolutely applauded, and just the tumultuous nature of that side of the ball so far this season is definitely one where you see changes coming there. The other one here, while we're staying in the NFC, and this one was from Prashant, and he had a very strong list. It wasn't a hot take. It wasn't a hot take. It was a hot list of what he wants the Washington Commanders ownership to do. Ron Rivera being relieved from his post there as head coach of the Washington Commanders this morning, and putting out a very professional, very respectable note and farewell to the fans. Exactly what you expect from someone like Ron Rivera, who is incredibly revered, forget as a coach, but as a character and as a man throughout the NFL. Prashant had this: Commanders ownership need to set a professional tone and lock down new stadium and facilities. Personnel needs to maximize draft capital, draft a generational quarterback. New coaching staff needs to build that connection with the fans. New quarterback, hopefully DC native Caleb Williams, needs to deliver on his promise. Tall order for a moribund franchise, but Harris isn't a typical new owner. A fair bit, a hot list, perhaps more than a hot take. My question and the way I want to frame this is what's possible for Washington. We've seen the names that they are interviewing. I joked and said the list of who the Washington Commanders have reached out to for their head coaching position to request interviews is everybody. Check your email, check your Hotmail, check your AOL, log into MSN Messenger, whatever one it was, see if you got one. And I can't blame Josh Harrison and the brains trust that he's acquiring there. We'll get into some of those names, what he's putting together to go wide and have an exhaustive search here. But how much can they achieve in one off season? Can they get to? Yes, they can move up to Caleb Williams if Drake May is not the first overall pick. Commanders sit the number 2 spot. If they want Caleb Williams, they could move up. If the Bears are willing to move, who knows what the Bears are going to do with that number 1 overall spot? Could be for sale. Could be their time to move on from Justin Fields. We've heard stuff about what they're looking into with the stadium. That is FedEx Field. It's a tough watch to see on TV as it is, and then you hear the horror stories and the collapsing stands and the burst pipes spewing God knows what out onto the field, or not onto the field, but onto patrons and members of the audience, the fan base there. Phil, how much can they possibly get done in one off season to rebuild some hope for folks like Prashant, Commanders fan base?
Well, I mean, it's step 1 is new head coach. Step 1A is, like you said, casting the net wide. And with the new ownership, I think there's reason for thinking fresh start, thinking willingness to invest, good draft capital. Remember, they traded away Montez Sweat. So they have 3 picks in the top 40. So if I'm a Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn or Raheem Morris, Anthony Weaver's the Ravens assistant that's coming, that's already been requested for an interview. All of that ticks the box. The quarterback is the big piece. All due respect to Sam Howell, it doesn't seem as though he will be QB1. They also need to get pieces around Howell. Their offensive line was a turnstile against many teams this season. Their defensive secondary was the worst in the NFL. I mean, the average passer rating against was well over 100. It's a lot of these quarterbacks could pick their yardage total against this team. So the big domino to fall is Caleb Williams, and they have the draft capital to move up and get him. You and I were discussing what would that cost. I mean, by my guess, obviously to move from 2 to 1, you swap the 2 and 1, and then you give probably the Montez Sweat 40 pick this year and a first next year. I think would entice the Bears, unless somebody else wants to pay more. And that's where the Bears are in a luxurious position of saying, who do we like most? Justin Fields, Caleb Williams, Drake May. Because they can choose any one of those 3. And whichever one they don't choose, now they can add to their draft capital because of how well they played the draft last year and got DJ Moore, that they can perhaps move down to 2 and parlay. Or if they like Caleb Williams, or if they like Drake May, they can make that trade, because I think it's a foregone conclusion that Washington would take the hometown kid, a kid who was born in Washington, D.C., played high school ball at Gonzaga Prep. Caleb Williams is D.C. through and through, to be the franchise savior for a franchise we think is going to rebrand again, probably change its nickname for a 3rd time in the last 5 years. So it's a list of dominoes that have to fall. The quarterback is the big one because it's a little bit out of Washington's control. If Chicago just loves Caleb Williams, you're kind of stuffed. But for the Commanders, it's strides in the right direction. But it's not, can all these steps happen? It's what's a realistic timetable. If you're okay with this coming to fruition in 3 to 4 years, then it's realistic. If you expect it 2024, 2025, I think it's a little too high on the grill.
I will say, at least you've got to be happy with who's manning the grill.
Yes.
For the first time, we're going to be talking about a head coach coming in and not talking about his relationship with Dan Snyder. We're not going to be talking about how you fit in with everything that carried on in that previous, I don't want to say stewardship, because that stewardship seems to carry some sort of connotation of, looking after something or leading it in a, coherent direction. But for once, we're not going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about, as Prashant said, this is not a first-time owner. This is someone who has been involved in sports ownership before, someone who's been through processes, bringing in some interesting minds there, tapping into the Golden State Warriors
Bob
dynasty
Myers,
there. Bob
Rick
Meyer
Spielman.
There you go. So I think it'll feel a bit different this time. And I think that's a good thing for Commanders fans. How the draft works, I think which direction you go at quarterback, so much of that is going to be defined by who you're putting in charge. They're looking at their football operations beyond just head coach, who you put in charge and what their vision is. But yeah, I think from an on-field product, whoever is behind quarterback there, you and me, this is our big feature, the early quarterback DB, the early QB DB, the development bureau. Protect whoever is back there. It has to be nauseating for Washington Commanders fans every time they listen to a studio show preseason, during the season, end of season, off season, whatever it is, talking about breaking down what they need to do, how many times they're being told, whatever happens, you need to build this offensive line. This offensive line needs to be better. It needs to be more complete. It needs to be whole. They have some pieces. They have some players that play with decent level of talent, but it is constantly a matchup negative. So that's a huge part of it on the field. I think they can get a lot done. It'll be fascinating to see how the stadium goes. It desperately needs an upgrade. I think the list is accurate here. I would just preach some level of patience from Prashant and fellow fans. I know they've had to put up with a lot, but don't try and rush the process when you think the process is actually being handled by
like the New
owners
Year's
and
Gym Club, Laz. Like the New Year's
it.
Gym Club. You're doing the right things.
Yeah.
Just need to continue doing the right things and not do anything crazy to try and accelerate the timeline.
Stick to the program. All right, Phil, that is the program for the day. We've got college football national championships coming up in less than 2 hours. We've got Wildcard Weekend knocking on the door. There's NBA everywhere. I mean, it's a fun time to be a sports fan. It's a fun time to have
more fun
ESPN.
in Australia where you have the southern summer. But it's good time for me to sit inside as the sun sets at 4:30 at my house and just partake in all the NFL, NBA, college football goodness. ESPN is a good spot for that. NFL Brekkie Show. We'll be back next week Laz will be in the same spot. I'll be on the road in Tampa. We'll see what my connection's like outside Raymond James. But until then, keep it on ESPN for all the latest in the NFL especially, but everything in the world of sport. Thank you for joining us today.